everybody. Welcome to Rethinking Youth Ministry. This week, I'm thrilled to be joined by Sarah Shelton.
Hey.
Kayla Lynn.
Hello.
And Marquise Cox.
What's up, man?
And this week, we are talking all about student anxiety, and we are thrilled to have especially Kayla Lynn with us, who is a counselor who's been with us before. Now, Kayla, you've been with us on some fun episodes. So a couple years ago, we had you on when we talked about suicide.
Yep.
And we had you on when we talked about self-harm.
Yep. Wow. Real talk.
And now you're here to talk about student anxiety. So you primarily work with students and teenagers who
struggle primarily with anxiety and depression. What comes with that is self-harm, suicidal thoughts, low self-esteem, those kinds of things that just interfere with their quality of life.
And we've got Marquise here, who leads a ministry here in the Atlanta area. We also have Sarah Shelton here, who's works with us here at Orange and leads small groups and has led students through anxiety as well. So this is going to be a great conversation.
Yes,
let's get into it. So we're talking about student anxiety and what we can do about it as youth ministry leaders. But why are we talking about this, and what are the stats saying? I did a little research as the host, and Kayla, you can correct me if I'm wrong here on some of these stats, but what I was finding is that about 25% of all teenagers in the United States will deal with anxiety at some point before they graduate high school. If you've got a 40-student ministry, 10 of those students, by the time they graduate from your ministry, are going to have dealt with this at some point. Kayla, does that kind of align with some of the stats you've heard, or how would you add to that or disagree with that?
So obviously, I mean, statistics I'm a little bit jaded by, just because typically they're self-report. So we miss a lot of students who are experiencing anxiety, experiencing symptoms of that, and just don't say anything. And either time passes or later on it gets worse, and that's when they're later diagnosed or get help.
So you're saying those stats could be higher? They
could be higher, definitely. And I think we just miss it because we all like to put on a mask anyway. So
yeah. Well, and I've also heard that student anxiety, it's more frequent in females than males, 2 to 1. Is that what you've seen as well? Is that true, or is that again go to the reporting thing? It
goes back to the reporting thing. I do think that it could be somewhat true that females have a higher rate of anxiety than males. It is also good to know that just this age is so important, because 50% of all lifetime cases of having a lifetime diagnosis of anxiety start at the age of 14. So really, it's when real life begins, is when the real symptoms come.
And before we really dive into this, I think we might need to just pause and define what it is, what anxiety is, and how it's different from stress. So Kayla?
Our expert.
We'll leave, Kayla. You just take it from here.
Yeah.
I just want to throw this out there too, in the aspect of, I've talked to a lot of counselors just preparing for this, of the difference between stress and anxiety. Yeah. And we all view it a little bit differently. So what I define, and I believe that most people would agree with, and just trust me on the semantics here, is that stress is really about feeling overwhelmed when we have a lot going on. And typically it's about specific things. Like, I have this huge to-do list and I feel like I'm not gonna be able to get it done.
I've got to be on a podcast today. I'm a little stressed.
Yeah, exactly. And when anxiety comes in, I always equate anxiety and fear together typically. I'm scared of something's gonna happen. I'm scared that somebody's gonna view me a certain way. I'm scared that there's something in the future that's outside of my control that I'm not gonna be able to help. And that's where I want to define the two differently, is that typically we're gonna talk about anxiety as fear, and how it can be helpful because it helps us prepare for certain circumstances to come up, helps us think things through. And when it's not helpful anymore, that's really when there's an issue of their quality of life, and you see a lot of symptoms come out.
So you said anxiety can be helpful.
So this is where semantics come into play, where stress and anxiety could be seen similarly, just because they both are trying to help you out. They both try to help you think things through, trying to prepare well. They have you feel the weight of certain things so that you know what's important and what's not.
That's good.
The problem with anxiety is when it's not helpful anymore, when it doesn't add the hour to your life anymore. And we have this feeling we've done everything we can, and then it's just there still.
So like, you've done everything in your power to prepare for whatever, a big test, if we're talking about high school students or middle schoolers, or they've got a big game coming up and they've done everything they can. And still there's just like this There's
overwhelming feeling.
Yeah.
And even after it or something
Exactly.
like that.
Yeah. The problem with anxiety is there's that pattern. And once it's done, once we complete that task that we think that is the main cause, the main source of our feelings,
Yeah,
we
that
move
game's
straight.
over, that test is over.
We find something else.
Okay.
It's that constant lie, in my opinion, that what is right now is not good enough.
That's good. My counselor described it to me, not a counselor, but been for a long time, that stress has a way of moving you forward, but anxiety is circular. It never really takes you anywhere. And so there's nowhere to go with it, but round and round and round.
So all of us around the table here work with students weekly. And, I feel like when I was Googling this, the words like epidemic kept showing up, like teen anxiety is at epidemic levels, or it's on the rise again, or whatever. In your experience week to week working with students, have you seen this become a thing in your ministries or in your small groups that you're leading? Are you noticing it come up and bubble to the surface more?
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I can't put like a year on it, like in the last 5 or 6 years or anything, but it just feels like it is on the rise more and more. I hate to feel like the old guy, but I feel like it is because of social media.
Oh, for sure.
And I know we're going to talk more about that, but with the rise of social media, with the rise of comparing yourself to other people, with the rise of seeing what other people have that you don't, and you're just scrolling on that for hours. I think the statistics say that we are on our phones. I can't throw something out, but hours on end, we are just on our phone. Totally. I know for a fact that it's always within 3 feet of us at all times, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
So it's always within 3 feet of us at all times. And with that being said, as students are scrolling, as students are seeing the highlight reel of other people's lives, I think that it has just, in recent years, starting to come up more and more because they feel like there's this place of arrival that they haven't gotten yet, but others have, seemingly.
Yeah.
So, but they feel like they haven't. So that's when they start to go in that anxiety bubble, that circular, just like no help. So, yeah.
I've been leading a group of students. They're about to be seniors, but I've been leading them since they've been in 8th grade. And I have never met a more stressed out group of girls.
Yeah.
And I think that Marquise, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Like there's this future thinking thing that's happening more now where they're so focused on what is 5 steps ahead of them and they're spinning their wheels trying to get there.
Yes.
It's constant pressure of like, in 8th grade, they were like, well, I have to take this many AP classes to get into college. I'm like, you're not even in high school yet.
Yeah.
And then as seniors, it's this pressure of like, what scholarship am I going to get? And then even like, how do I know who I'm going to marry? And I'm like, get a boyfriend, like, I don't know. So I just think there's this real sense of they can see 5 steps ahead of themselves differently. And there's this pressure to get there faster and better than a lot. Or maybe just sooner than other people. And that might be stress. I don't know.
Well, the biggest thing too is like they see the 5 steps, but there's no way to control like right now how to get there. Like they can do what they can do today, and that's kind of where the stress is of like, okay, I've done what I was supposed to do. But other than that, when that feeling is still there of like feeling out of control, that's where it becomes a major problem.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's causing student anxiety, because it sounds like we're getting into that now.
Yeah.
Before we recorded this, I was actually talking to a parent who works here in our offices, and we were talking about, what are we podcasting about? Student anxiety. And she talked about how her teen is really wrestling with this, and she's trying to figure out what it is that's causing so much anxiety. And she thinks, and Kayla, I'd love your thoughts if this is accurate. There are too many decisions always in front of her. That is like when her teen was a toddler or elementary student, it was like, do you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? Do you want a burger or do you want chicken nuggets? And then now that they're in high school or even middle school, there are too many options in front of them. There are, now it's not just, do you want to go to this school or this school? It's, you've got 1,000 schools to choose from. You have 1,000 places you could go for XYZ. You have 1,000 different extracurriculars you could do. It's no longer baseball or soccer. It's there are 1,000 things in front of them all the time, which is a little different than a way a lot of us grew up. So it's almost anxiety because there are too many decisions to be made. I know that was a long story, but is that is that really getting at the heart of what's causing student anxiety these days, or is there something else?
So I want to take it a step further in that, yes, it's about choices, but I think that's more of a trigger. And the piece of that trigger is, what does that fear come from? Is it that they're scared that if I make this decision to go to a specific school, what is that going to mean about them? And how are they going to be seen about that? And there's so many things that are outside their control that they don't know yet, that they're trying to make a decision off of. They don't know what friends they're going to make there. They don't know what classes they're going to be able to get into. And having all of that weight triggers the anxiety because there's nothing to do with it.
I think too, it's important to note that sometimes there isn't a real particular reason you can pinpoint. I think as a person, basically I've been training for this podcast my whole life because I've basically dealt with anxiety since I was 14. And for me, I'm a super extroverted person, you know, grew up in church, had no like quote unquote reason to feel that way. And I just remember literally waking up one day and being really overwhelmed with worry about the future and about the present and about everything. And I remember trying to articulate it to a friend, and she was just like, well, why? And I was like, I don't know why. And I think
just calm down, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. She's like, well, just don't worry about that. I'm like, well, I wish I could just not worry about that. But I think it's really hard. And that's sometimes where parents or leaders or, you know, even friends get hung up, is that they want to find the root and the symptom. And sometimes I think there is one, but sometimes there's not. And so I think that that's where we get stuck sometimes with not knowing how to handle it, is because in some cases there's a real obvious reason for why a student is anxious, and sometimes they just are. We can't necessarily fix it ever, but especially when we don't know where it's coming from, and we never want to shame a kid or make a kid feel like something's wrong with them, because I felt like that a lot. Like I don't have a reason to feel this way.
I think that's maybe the first huge takeaway as ministry leaders, as small group leaders. It's, you never want to be that authority figure or adult in a kid's life who says, just get over it, or just calm down, or diminish what they're going through, or diminish the fact that they don't understand what they're going through and there isn't something that they can pinpoint. Like you never want to just say, you know, high school is short, you'll get past it. It's fine. You know,
it's just a phase.
Yeah.
So I think that is one huge piece right off the bat here, is we really don't want to belittle our students for going through whatever they're going through.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody ever deliberately belittles, just to be clear. Like, I don't think that's anyone's intention. I think everybody's well-meaning and wants to help. Yeah. But I think as leaders, especially with this, if a student comes to you and is vulnerable enough to say, hey, I'm struggling. You know, for me, I call it mental gymnastics. Like, on the outside, I'm like, hey, everybody. And on the inside, I'm doing mental gymnastics just to get in the door sometimes. Yeah, wow. And I think if I am vulnerable enough to say that to somebody, especially as a 14, 15-year-old girl, you know, even if the response is well-meaning, I think we have to be really careful with our words, because we have a lot of power over the next direction or the next step a student takes to cope and get help.
And I think a lot of times the response is to try to fix it. And really what we need to remember is part of quote unquote fixing it is just sitting with it and being there for them.
That doesn't feel like you're, I could see though, as a small group leader or ministry leader, that doesn't feel like the best solution. It's like, all right, well, you're feeling anxious. Okay. You know, it feels like we feel compelled to like, okay, let's do something about it, you know, and start running down a track with them. But you're saying that might not always be the best answer initially.
Definitely not initially. And the biggest thing is listening first, because the closer you are to the problem, the more you'll understand how complex it is. Because typically if we feel like we can fix it with one sentence or one word, we're not getting it. We're not getting the real issue. Because I mean, we're all human. They don't want to feel that way. If that was the way to fix it, they probably would have already done it.
Yeah. And I think too, as a person who has dealt with this, and particularly as a teenager, if someone gave me a list of things to do, that would just add to my anxiety. If somebody said, okay, like you feel this way, so here's 5 things we can try right away without sitting in it with me first. And then I did those 5 things and they didn't work. I would be like, okay, well, we have a problem now, you know? And then it's like, well, I'm just more anxious because the tools didn't work for me.
Wow.
I'm going to jump in here and pretty much say too, is we need to understand why they're not doing those things. Because there's, you know, there might be the depression background. There might be, I've already tried that. or there might be other things that are getting in the way of them trying to help themselves.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Mainly to you, Kayla.
I'll give it a shot too, Marquise.
Right.
Yeah. What do you mean?
What would you say is the difference between, because you brought up depression,
Mm-hmm.
what do you say is the difference between anxiety and depression in, with students or with people in general?
So I've kind of talked about this before. The way that I kind of relate, physical or medical like health with mental health, because I think obviously they coincide so easily. So say that you have a cold, then you are way more vulnerable to get strep throat, to get pneumonia, to get other, diagnoses or sicknesses because we have a low immune system. So with anxiety is very similar, whether it's anxiety first or depression first, you have a low immune system. So that's where they coincide together. And the way that I've seen anxiety turn into depression is because they have such a heightened energy for so long that's not sustainable that they fall apart and that they just don't have energy anymore. And it's almost like I don't care anymore, but they do. And so there's this additional weight that they can't lift.
So what are the things that are causing the increase in student anxiety? I know that Marquise has brought up social media a few minutes ago. I was mentioning how maybe, there's too many decisions to be making and they're trying to, that's causing anxiety. Sarah brought up, well, it might be nothing that's causing anxiety.
The biology of it. Yeah.
So I want to turn over any other rocks. So what else is causing some of the anxiety at epidemic levels that we're hearing about these days?
Yeah, I love how Sarah brought up genetics and biology of our bodies. And I mean, that could just be a huge piece of it. Wow. Higher standards. I feel like so many kids, as time goes, people accomplish more. And because people accomplish more, we look around and we feel like we've got to meet that more. And because we have that higher standard and that pressure that we feel like we have to meet that's constant, I feel like it is different in our culture now versus way back when.
Yeah, we need to lower our standards.
There it is.
Don't try as hard, everybody.
Well, and you can see through, because of things like social media, you can see how much others are achieving.
And then I'll always go back to if I'm not achieving or if I didn't get there, then what does that mean about me? And what fear kind of comes up with that.
Yeah. And I also see and I don't think it's just confined to students in this area, but I am in this area, but the parents can also add on to the stress and the anxiety with the standards and the expectations that they levy onto the students as well. Where it's a lot of conversations I've had with students is, well, my mom says I have to do this. My dad says I have to get here. He went to this school. I am not good enough to play football. I am not getting a scholarship. And all of these different things of my parents are saying this. My parents want me to, which again, to your point, Sarah, it's coming out of a great place.
Yeah.
It's well-intended. We want the best for you. But when you don't spot that what you're doing is also weighing someone down, I think it could do some damage. So that external factor of parents leaning in can also weigh on them a lot.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a level of parent education here that's important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It even just going back to defining the difference between anxiety and stress, Kayla, that you brought up earlier, that almost equipping parents to identify the difference in their own kids, between, they're just stressed out because of the test, and there's something else going on here that they can be sensitive to.
Yep.
And they need to be aware of the difference between a phase and a pattern.
Can you unpack that?
So a phase is, it totally makes sense that right before the SAT, your child is stressed out.
Right.
Is there the next thing that comes up that they are completely overwhelmed, unmanageable? And I think with Marquise was saying with parents is parents are on social media too. They're comparing each other's kids. They're comparing where everybody's going. And I think that they sometimes need to do a better self-check in what they're modeling and what their kids are picking up.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
Once this whole internet fad is over, this all
we're all gonna feel a lot better.
Over.
So how are students, how have you guys seen students coping with anxiety?
In good ways or bad ways?
Yeah.
What's your...
which angle do you want to take
I'll
first?
share with I lead a small group and they're middle schoolers, and that's a whole other question, Caleb. We've got to get to the difference between that. But I have a few students who are anxious and they choose to cope in ways like, pounding energy drinks and playing tons of video
which is
games.
never recommended.
Like,
if you are anxious, please do not.
it's
increase
almost
your
like-
heart rate.
But like basically their mind gets rolling, and they're going to diffuse it somehow.
Yeah.
And it's usually, for at least the guys that I've worked with, those are the two options.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, energy drinks and video games, and
Yep.
Fortnite, energy
Yes.
drink, energy drink,
Yeah.
energy
Which
drink.
the two I feel like show, okay, the energy drink is I need enough energy to fix my problem, to go farther, to accomplish more. And the other side is avoidance, because
Oh, for
sometimes
sure.
when we fear, we fight or flight, right? You know, everybody kind of knows
Absolutely.
about that. So we're either going to fight and try to take this down, or we're going to go try and hide. And I think that's what you were saying too, Sarah, is the isolation is the hiding.
Yeah, I think my students, and particularly the student who really struggles with anxiety, Netflix is her coping mechanism, which sometimes it is mine too. But I think she does it's like she feels like she doesn't have anybody to talk to. She doesn't know what to do with these feelings. And so she will watch Netflix sometimes all night long.
Oh, yeah.
Like she will binge all night long.
Yeah.
YouTube is huge.
YouTube is, I was gonna
And
say
then they
that
don't
too.
sleep.
Yeah. And
I
then
was gonna say that.
she didn't sleep. And sometimes I think this sounds like an old lady thing to say, but YouTube scares me.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes kids, especially when they're struggling with something like anxiety and depression, they can go down these rabbit holes of people who have posted these videos, and it's like, oh, they feel the same way. And I don't know that that's bad. I don't know. But I think there is a tendency to open your brain up to things that are only going to make it heavier and darker than better and lighter. So I think there's a lot of media coping that I've seen in students.
Absolutely. And it's that whole avoidance aspect.
Totally.
And then once you get to high school realm, which, you know, I'm sure that takes place in middle school too, but high school realm is when they know a buddy, they know someone who has substance that they want to partake in. And that's when we get the drugs and the alcohol. And it really does come out of a place of, man, I want to relieve this stress. I want to. Now, there is the like, I just want to like have fun and like party. But there is a lot of the avoidance that takes place of, man, well, I just want to try it. I just want to do it this one time and see what happens. And it's that whole idea of escaping my current reality just for a little bit. And then you start to chase that and over again. And so I think that's just, it's a subtle but clear way to start going into what we see a lot of students getting involved in, which is substance and alcohol abuse as well.
Yeah. I think too, there's this desire to feel normal when you are struggling so much mentally. And for me in high school is when people sort of started to figure out that I was struggling, because it became harder and harder to hide as pressure to get into college and all that kind of stuff was taking place. And for me, it was like, oh man, I want to do anything that makes me seem normal to everybody else around me. So whether it's going to that party, even though I don't really want to go, I just want to feel normal or look normal to everybody else.
Yeah.
So Kayla, how else have you seen in your experience working with students, both in the church world and in your counseling facility? So how are teens coping with anxiety?
Well, I think Marquise hit it right. I would say even that kind of jumped in the difference between middle school and high school is they get more accessibility to the substances. And then, I mean, you're right, Cedar, your experiences of avoidance, whether it's the Netflix or the video games, or I'm just going to go out and have fun with my friends, even though I don't feel normal or I feel this stress. I know that being at home, also I feel that stress too. Other pieces that's where kind of self-harm can come in, is because they want to feel something else besides this. And physical pain is so much easier than the mental or physical anxiety that they're experiencing. The last thing I'll say is that it can really be seen through anger, is that they let it all out. They, scream, they're upset, they're, completely overwhelmed. They try to get it out. And yes, that might work for that moment. But once again, the pattern comes back.
But and that's crazy, because they also are going through these hormonal changes with their bodies. And so there's all this like irritability of like, my body's changing, hormones are raging. And on top of that, I have anxiety. So there's just so much going on inside of them, and they don't know how to necessarily articulate that. And that's when we see a lot of the coping things. So I think that's great when you brought up the anger, because it's just, I remember being in high school myself, and I just was like, I would just yell at my parents for no reason. And I mean, I got butt whoopings, but anyway, that's another subject. I can sit on your couch later. But anyway, it's just, I remember just having all of these things going on inside me and not knowing how to handle them. And that resulted in coping mechanisms as well.
So that's a great point, Marquise, though, because in high school, you do have in middle school too, all these hormones going on there. Some of it's just natural. Like there's going to be natural anger that's not tied to anxiety. And even going back, Marquise, to what you said a minute ago about how, well, sometimes they're just, diving into these substances or energy drinks or whatever, because they want to have fun. It's their culture. Yeah. It's just their world. How do you define, how do you pinpoint when it goes from just it's their culture to there's something deeper going on, to they're just having fun versus there's something, this actually is tied to something deeper like anxiety?
And that could just be the start of like, how are you doing? And just kind of asking questions and seeing, okay, is this really an escape, or are you really just doing this recreationally or for fun or because you want to go to this party? Yeah. And a lot of it too is, I'll ask a lot of my kids after they drank or after they got high, I'm like, okay, so was it helpful? How are you now? And then they'll be like, well, for a second or for a little bit, but sometimes there's a lower low that comes out of that because it's gone. Yeah. And it hurts that it's still there. So sometimes I'll even dive in that regard of, okay, what happened after? What did you do after? How were you doing after all of that?
And I also think when you start to see things outside of their character, they start to do things that are just completely not them. And you're just like, hey, what's going on? Like, what, let's track back to what has taken place. I know of a certain student that I've been walking alongside him, and he just started to do things that was just not him. He started to talk to adults in a way that wasn't him. He started to just really check out. And there was things like that I started to take notice of, that I was wondering, man, what is going on first thought was what's going on at home, what's going on at school, what's taking place. And come to find out, it was just this deeper sense of anxiety. And so they started to lash out in different ways and act out in different ways, just outside their character. So if there's somebody that, like you, Sarah, is like super, super extrovert, and then you're just like, counter that, and you're introvert, you're in your room, not talking to anybody. I think that's a good telltale sign of like, man, I wonder, let's see what's going on here. It may not always be anxiety or depression, but it's just like, you know what, this is outside of who Sarah is.
I think for me too, as a student, like I could put, like Kayla, I think you said this earlier, like we all wear a mask, and I really kept the extrovert mask on, and I was real like bubbly and all that kind of stuff, but I started showing physical symptoms. Like stress and anxiety really manifests itself in me physically, and so I lost a lot of weight, my hair was falling out, I wasn't sleeping as well, and I was just fortunate. My dad actually is a counselor and worked in genetic counseling at the time, and so he sort of was like, this is not, so even though I could come to the dinner table or whatever, like, hey, everybody, he really had the background to see like, oh, there's something else going on here. But I think to Marquise's point, like as leaders, especially, we're fortunate to like know our students and walk with our students. And so anytime we see changes in them, I think that there could be a sign, big or small, that something else is going on.
Absolutely.
So going back to, what our responsibility is as leaders there, we do have a responsibility to know our students and kind of pick up some of those changes in behavior. What other responsibilities do we have as leaders in our ministry, or even as small group leaders? What role can we play to address the student anxiety issue that's going on in our culture and in our ministries? What do we need to say from stage? What do we need to say in small group? Is there something we should be saying?
I think a big place to start is that you're not alone, and that we do need to talk about it, and holding it in, won't fix it. And they might want to hold on to that for a little bit longer, but at some point we all want to just lay it down and be like, I can't do this by myself anymore. And that's kind of part of, not kind of, the part of Christianity is that we aren't meant to do, number one, life alone, but we aren't perfect, and we do need help, and we do need a savior, and we do need that forgiveness and peace, and of how God responds to us and wants to take care of us, and how that love can even help with our anxieties as well. I'm not saying you should put a Bible verse whatsoever once a kid just pours out their heart.
Don't do that.
Please don't do that. But kind of seeing that, okay, that this is a human thing, is that none of us are really good enough. And so it kind of makes sense that we feel that way, or that we do have that fear. but sometimes we just don't run to the right solution.
Yeah, and I think a huge responsibility for youth ministry leaders is, one of the things I always say is, whatever you're struggling with, struggle with it here. This is not the place where you need to run from or take a step back from.
That's really
Go
good.
through what you're going through here. You won't be looked at differently. You won't be judged. God has not changed his mind about you. Go through it here. So when they say like, well, I stopped coming because I started having sex with my girlfriend. Hey, I'm not saying have sex with your girlfriend here at church, but what I'm saying is, if that's something you're involved in, that doesn't mean stop showing up to our youth group.
It doesn't disqualify.
It doesn't disqualify you.
great.
Whatever you're dealing with that you feel shame from, man, I want you to be able to feel like you're able to not do that here.
You're good.
Not do that here. Don't do that here.
I want you to feel comfortable whatever is going on in your life and bringing that to the youth group. Another piece is, I think that it's almost a mandate to let people know who struggle with anxiety that you are not less than because you struggle with anxiety.
No.
That's good.
It may, and as hard as this may sound, it may never leave.
That's right.
It may continue to be with you, and you are not less of a Christian because of that.
No.
So even though you've prayed and you've cried out to God about taking the anxiety away, if it is still there, that does not mean that God does not love you and he's not still there for you, or he's not still there for you. But I think anxiety is a place where, and this isn't something I continually struggle with, but I always tell people this is an opportunity to cling closer to the cross. And it's not a reason to say, you know what, I read that Bible verse, don't be anxious. I read this, the pastor said I can pray and it will be done for me, but it's not taking place in my life. So really what I want to say is, if you're someone that gets up from stage, or you are over curriculum, one of the things you have to make sure you are saying is that if this does not leave you, you are still God's son, daughter. All of those things are still true about you, even though you feel like your situation hasn't changed.
That's so good. Nothing's wrong with you.
Nothing's wrong with you. Exactly right.
I think something I tell my students all the time is basically that God gives us tools to handle so many things.
Yeah.
And there are seasons of your life where maybe you just need one or two of those tools to get by. And there are seasons of your life where you need every tool in your tool belt.
Yeah.
And either way, it's okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're going to be anxious or struggle, and all you need to do is go for a walk or pray or memorize that scripture. And those things really do work. Like, we don't want to minimize that is truth and that helps. But sometimes you need more than that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need that plus a counselor, plus maybe medication, plus, exercise, all these things. And it doesn't mean you always need all those things, but I think basically normalizing that it's okay to need more than just a prayer.
And it doesn't mean that you don't trust God less.
Exactly.
No. Yeah,
you
definitely.
still trust God and go to counseling. You still trust God and take medication.
Yeah.
You still trust God and struggle, which is crazy to think that if I'm struggling, I'm not trusting God.
Yeah,
That
that's
is
ridiculous.
false and that is a myth. So you can trust God and still have these things that you do to use these tools to make you better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these are messages we can I would rewind the past couple minutes, and there's your message from
Right there,
Marquise and Sarah here. Like, that's what you need to communicate from stage. And I do think it is important to communicate this from stage because that opens the door to communicate these same things and reiterate them in small group.
Yeah.
But I really do think it is, when you address something like this from the stage, it gives the students permission and your small group leaders permission to bring these things up and bring these things to the surface without making it weird. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So I think that's huge. And we actually did that here at Orange, a little shameless plug that Sarah and Kayla were able to speak into. We put together a standalone message about anxiety, and the bottom line isn't, memorize this verse and it'll get better. The bottom line is
more.
there are tools to take on anxiety, and it is things like scripture and going for a walk or medication or a counselor or your small group, all those kinds of things. And so if you are interested in that, we'll link to that in the show notes. That's not just, we're not just trying to sell something here, but that is available.
Yeah.
But I just think we have to be comfortable as ministry leaders to talk about this and educate ourselves to talk about this from the stage. Just because we're not experts in student anxiety doesn't mean we get a pass on talking about these from the
Definitely.
stage.
So true. So true.
So as we start to wrap up, what is the goal of what does the win look like when we're working with a student struggling with anxiety? Because when we were working on, honestly, a message about this here at Orange, Kayla brought up, like, the goal is not no anxiety.
Right.
Like,
No.
and if you set
I
that,
wish.
like, if you set that as the bar, you could actually end up causing, going back to the whole 5-step thing, like, we're going to
never
cause
work.
more
Yeah.
anxiety by
Yeah.
trying to get rid of it all completely. So what is the goal if we're walking with a student who's struggling with anxiety?
Well, I think Marquise and Sarah both said this. The first thing is opening up and knowing that they're welcome and knowing that that's part of the conversation. I think that number one is a win, because the honest pieces of themselves are the ones that we want most. And I don't want them to come in and act like they have it all together. That's the farthest thing that any of us want. I lead a small group as well. And that fake face is the thing that I want to tear down most. And I think that's the thing that they feel like they have to hold up most. So them opening up, number one, is a win. Long term, as a counselor, for me, is my goal is that even when you experience anxiety, even when you hear those lies, even when you're not sure where it's coming from, is to know the lie it tells and being able to be like, okay, yes, just because I feel this way does not mean I have to respond in the way that it's telling me to, or believe what my thoughts are saying right now. And it's kind of learning, okay, how can I respond in a way that's helpful and not hurtful? So what do I need versus want? I might want weed. I might want to self-harm. I might want to go isolate myself. But what do I need to do? I probably need to go reach out. I probably need to exercise. I probably need to share this with somebody. Those are kinds of the things that I see as a win, is responding in a healthier way that's more helpful to them, that will provide hope, but isn't going to be the quick fix. Oh, they don't have anxiety anymore.
That's good.
Yeah, it's really good. I feel like for me as a leader, a win is number one, that they keep showing up and keep opening up. Because I think sometimes there'll be a crisis or something that makes them open up, and then they're like, oh, never mind. I wish I didn't say that. It's in that in-between moment where you really have to show them and go after them, show them you value them, show them they can trust you, and that you take them seriously. And then I think for me, a win is just one step at a time. Like if I can see you do one step to use it, one healthy tool to deal with your anxiety, then that's a win for me. It's not going to be, I don't need you to do all 15 steps, because then again, we're overwhelmed. But I think if I can see you and help you do one thing, then okay, we did that one thing. So now let's do the next thing. And I think it's step-by-step wins.
Totally.
And I just so want to create a place where, and I think that's what the church should be. I just want to create a place, and my win personally with our youth ministry is create a place where people come in and they are okay with just being real. And when they get to group, or when they're talking to their small group leader, they're saying, hey, this past week was horrible. As a result, I did X, Y, and Z. And no one is there with shame. No one is there with judgment. They're like, thank you so much for opening up. How can I be here for you? Is there another step? Is there a counselor I can point you to? Whatever the next tool is, I just want to create a place that is just so safe for any student that's out there to come and feel like, man, I can struggle here. I can struggle here and be fine. And although this isn't the place where I always want to be, and they want to help me move forward and get better, but I can come just as I am and be okay. And be accepted for who I am. So that's the type of place that I think I want to create. And I think that's the win for a lot of youth ministries and small groups. Small groups really are the place where they need to be able to go deeper and have those real conversations. And
I would also add to that, build on that, like the win, I do think is for students to be real, like Marquise is saying, and open up. The win isn't for you as the ministry leader or small group leader to fix it for them. And the win is to be their ally. And so sometimes that means, yes, they were opened up and they were real in your ministry. That also means, okay, now we need to go to another step of getting someone who's not me involved, whether it's, a counselor or a therapist of some sort, or, getting a doctor's advice on medication, something like that. And before we wrap up, I do think that is an important side of things to acknowledge, that we are not always going to be able to fix these things in the church. There's a tension though sometimes, Kayla, when we talk about counselors and medications, that there's cost involved with some of that. Do you have any, if you are sitting across from a parent who's saying, hey, my kid's really struggling with anxiety. I can't afford counseling. How would you resource those families and those people?
Yeah, so it gets tough. I mean, counseling can be expensive. Even when you use insurance will limit how many sessions you can have, or they might not think that you have a worse enough diagnosis to continue counseling. I've been through all the insurance stuff. It's a mess. So it is sometimes really difficult, even when you feel like you have resources, to feel like you're running out. So for people who can't access counseling, there's a lot of local support groups. There's, for anybody in the U.S., there's a National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they will have so many resources per state, per your area, that might be really helpful as a parent, as a student, in order to get connected, so that, number one, they once again don't feel alone, but they're also getting helpful resources to cope and move forward and take that next step. And specifically in Georgia, there's a grant that funds the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. And there might be some in other states too that have the specific grant. But what it is it's a resource center. So you can call and they will give you resources, whether you have insurance or not, to be able to have counselors or places to go, even when you're financially limited. It's all, the resource center is all free. And even it's a crisis line as well. So if somebody is in crisis, a counselor in their local area will come to them within 45 minutes of their dispatch. So pretty much once they deem that they need somebody there, they will be there within 45 minutes. That's one of their requirements. So it's really, really cool that if something's going on, to get started with, you're not stuck, you have options.
And that's the Georgia, what?
It's called the Georgia Crisis and Access Line.
So we'll link to that. And if you're in another state or another country, you might have a similar kind of resource available to you that you might just have to Google and do a little digging.
Yeah, and reach out to, the local churches, school counselors, maybe their specific school counselor or the director of their school counseling center. And they might also have resources too of who they've worked with before.
Yeah, and I just think that on that note, it is good and wise to know that your church is not a catch-all for every single thing that goes through the doors, or every single situation that walks through those doors. So just be, if it's another issue, just be mindful and do research where you can partner with. You don't always have to pioneer as a church. You can always partner with other people. So trying to be the catch-all has not worked historically in the past. So that's a great point.
And even counselors don't see themselves as a catch-all. I might get a client 1 hour once a week, and that's not enough for anybody. I can't be their community. I can't be by their side. I don't get to go to their 8th grade, get ready to go to their dresses and take pictures with them. And that's kind of something, that's why I honestly became a small group leader, because I wanted to be a part of their life more than just in the office. That I don't get to provide that as a counselor. So every part at this table, and even parents and family and mentors, those are all huge pieces that every student needs. It takes a village.
That's right.
And speaking of resources, we have one for you if you're listening. We actually have, just to add to your list of resources, a free parent conversation guide all about student anxiety. We'll have a link to that in our show notes at rethinkingrym.org. But that's just yet another tool that you could equip parents with so that they can talk to their teen, middle school or high school, about anxiety and how to identify it and all of those kinds of things. So it really is, to your point, Kayla, it takes a village of people and resources to help the next generation, help our students deal with anxiety. Well, thank you all for joining us for this conversation. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, your expertise. Thanks for sharing your expertise, Kayla. That was terrific. And we do hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast. We hope it's been helpful, and we will include all the links to the resources mentioned here at our website, rethinkingrym.org. And if you want to be part of the conversation this week as we talk about what it looks like to effectively lead our students through anxiety, we'll be talking about that this week in our Facebook group. Just search for Orange Students on Facebook, or click the link in our show notes. We'll take you there too. Until next time, thanks for listening.